All right, if we can pull the PowerPoint up on the screen, we'll get started. Not sure, it disappeared then. Yeah, all right, we're getting there. All right. Perfect. All right. Okay, good morning. I was just, this is Bonnie McFarland. I was just scrolling through the list to see who's out there and how many of you got through the year and are still here and still with us. And it was good to see so many of your names out there that you're unfortunate thing is you're still working and it's almost the end of the year, but we don't usually have a June meeting, but so much we had a feeling with things the way they've been that something would be happening that would affect your lives that we needed to talk about. So we did schedule a meeting this year for June, just as kind of a final end of year meeting. And of course, some things did occur. So let's take a look at what we're going to look at today. So what happened was we have new federal money coming in under ESSER for direct money to districts under the American Recovery Act, and that's under ESSER 3. And Amy's going to give an update on that and what needs to take place in the next couple months to get those funds flowing out to districts. Then we're going to have an FPM update, some new things on fiscal monitoring, particularly from Adrian. Some reminders about LCAP submission, approval process, and where we go from here in that process. And then finally, some just a kind of a catch-all, a few reminders for things that are pending the end of the year and getting ready for next year. So that's our agenda for today. Not sure if it will be as long as usual, but usually we end up filling that time. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Same as usual, we'll be getting back to you if we can answer any right away. We'll do our best to do that. Otherwise, we'll do a Q&A for you with any follow-up with more detailed responses to your questions. And with us today, as I mentioned, are Amy Tomomatsu, Adrian Balcazar, Jeannie Keith, and I will be sharing with you today. And there's the link where you'll find the Q&As from previous meetings and where this one will be posted. So I think without anything further, we will move right into ESSER 3 and let Amy help us with that. Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. Yes, good morning. I'm going to go over some information about ESSER 3. And next slide, please. ESSER 3 is the funding to LEAs, which was part of the most recent federal relief package signed into law as the American Rescue Plan Act on March 11, 2021. This was the third such act, with the first two being the CARES Act and the CRRSA Act. Next slide. In this latest relief package, it includes additional funding with the main funding source for LEAs being ESSER 3. If you recall, that acronym ESSER 3 stands for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. And this has been included with each federal relief package, including with CARES, which was just called plain ESSER. And then when they came out with CARISA or CIRSA, the second relief package, they called it ESSER 2. So now we're looking at ESSER 3. And today we'll be looking at the additional requirements tied to this new federal funding source. LEAs will also be required to report on any ARP Act funds that they receive, and these funds must be tracked and reported separately from the CARES Act and CARISA Act funds. So let's take a look on the next slide. So ESSER 3 funds may be used for pre-award costs dating back to March 13, 2020, when the national emergency was declared. These funds are available for obligation by the state and sub-recipients through September 30th, 2024. There are assurances that the LEA must submit by June 25th in order to receive funding through the first apportionment, which has been estimated to be sometime in about mid-August. If the LEA misses that June 25th deadline, you would still receive the funding, but just not when the first apportionment is released. Once the assurances are submitted, timeline-wise, the LEA has 30 days to submit the required safe return and continuity of instruction plan. And that's one of the two required plans related to this ESSER 3 funding. And we'll be talking about both of those. The first link on this slide will send you to the webpage where you can submit the assurances. And also CDE has created a site where anyone can search by county and LEA the current submission status. So if you want to go in and check if your LEA has submitted the assurances already, there's a link for that search there. And the next link is for information on ESSER 3 fund allocations, which are based on the LEA's share of funding received under Title I Part A in fiscal year 2020-21. And the last link, the fourth one, there is just a general ARP Act fundings webpage. Okay, next slide. So yes, I referenced there are two required plans connected to ESSER 3. And that first one is the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services Plan. This plan is the one that focuses on the safe operation of schools primarily. And as stated in the previous slide, that's the one that would need to be submitted within 30 days of submission of the assurances. The second plan is the Expenditure Plan, or also known as the ARP ESSER LEA plan. And that is the plan that will describe the use of ESSER 3 funds. Next slide. So we're going to take a look at both of these and the templates that CD has developed for them. So on April 22nd, 2021, the Department of Education published the interim final requirements that required LEAs receiving ESSER 3 funds to submit a plan for the safe return to instruction and continuity of services. Plans are required of all LEAs unless the LEA is fully virtual with no physical location. The CDE has posted a template for this safe return and continuity of instruction plan, and there's a couple screenshots there here. It is expected that LEAs will provide high-level responses of approximately a couple paragraphs to each of the questions in this template. And again, within 30 days of submitting the assurances, this plan must be submitted to the CDE through their emergency services email address. So that's there on the slide. It's also the same email address that LEAs may send questions regarding this plan. Next slide. The CDE has said that an LEA may use existing plans that address safe return and continuity of instruction, such as their Cal OSHA or AB 86 plan, if the plan met the statutory requirements of Section 2001I, but maybe not all the requirements of the interim final requirements, and there's the link to that there, the IFR, then the LEA must revise and post the revised plan within 6 months of receiving the ESSER funds. So there's a little bit of a longer period of time to get that IFR requirements met. But if your plans that are existing do not meet the statutorily compliant requirements, and those were not in place by March 11th, 2021, then this plan, probably using the CD's template, must be developed and posted within 30 days of completing the assurances. So questions regarding this should be sent, again, like I said, to the emergency services at cde.ca.gov. There is also a requirement, just to keep in the back of our minds, that there may be potentially revised CDC guidance or other changes related to safe return. And so the plan does state that they have included a requirement to review and revise as appropriate the plan every 6 months to incorporate any new or revised CDC guidance. This plan will also require an opportunity to provide public input and to take that input into account in the development of the plan. So that's plan one. The next slide, we'll look at the expenditure plan. So this is a second required plan related to ESSER 3. And this plan has a submission due date of September 30th, 2021. And this is more a plan that will describe the use of the ESSER 3 funds to address students' academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs, as well as the opportunity gaps that may have existed before and maybe were exacerbated by the pandemic. Next slide. The LEA in this plan must use with the ESSER 3 funds. The LEA must use at least 20% of its apportionment for expenditures related to addressing the academic impact of lost instructional time through the implementation of evidence-based interventions such as summer learning or summer enrichment, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, or extended year programs. For ESSER 3, LEAs will be required to report for 2 different resource codes. So that first 20% requirement for learning loss is resource code 3214. And for the other remaining 80%, which would be used on any of the other ESSER 3 allowable uses, is under resource code 3213. The template, as we will see, will include prompts and instructions to help LEAs to include all the required descriptions. Next slide, please. So the CDE recently hosted a feedback session for the draft template that they presented on June 21st. And in the template, is described that the LEA may include actions that are in existing plans, including the LCAP, to the extent that the actions address ARP ESSER requirements. When including actions in other plans, the LEA must specify the amount of ARP ESSER funds that it intends to use to implement the actions. These ARP ESSER funds must be in addition to any funding that those actions, for those actions already included in the plans of reference by the LEA. So that's important to note. And any existing plans referenced by the LEA in this plan must also be accessible and available to the public. So it's likely that if you are referencing actions in your LCAP, then your LCAP will be posted to your website along with this plan as well. And that was those were screenshots of the draft plan and the final plans pending. Next slide, please. So this plan also has a requirement for the opportunity to provide public input and to take that input into account. So we want to share with you the required stakeholder consultation for this expenditure plan. And CD has acknowledged the substantial amount of planning that LEAs have already completed related to prevention and mitigation strategies and addressing the academic impact of lost instructional time. And so the template and instructions seek to provide LEAs with flexibility to reference actions or community input described in existing plans to the extent that they address the ARP ESSER requirements. So the required stakeholders are similar to the groups involved in the LCAP process, as you can see. Additionally, though, there is a requirement to engage other stakeholders if present or served by the LEA, including tribes, civil rights organizations, and others with special interests. Next slide. The plan must be adopted by the local governing board or body of the LEA through a public meeting and submitted on or before September 30th, 2021, and posted to the LEA's website. The CDE will be releasing a final uniform template for the LEA expenditure plan in the very near future. So once that plan is available, it will be announced through the Ed Relief Funds listserv. So if you're not currently on this listserv, we've included that link so that you can join the listserv and make sure you have the latest information on that as well. And that concludes the ESSER 3 presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne with an FPM update. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Well, FPM, the 2021 school year is ending, and so is the 2021 FPM reviews. So as we wrap up the 2021 school year, here are a few most common findings in the Los Angeles County FPMs that took place this past year. Most of them were in compensatory education and the English Learner Program. So in the compensatory education, CE 10 and CE 19 were the most common findings. And in CE 10, which is allocations and reporting, the main reasons for the findings were some of these bulleted items. So the school plan budget pages did not reflect the school plan's total allocation and amount reported in CARS. So there wasn't an alignment. Also, there was insufficient evidence that indicated that the school site council had a role in the developing, updating, and the approval of the school plan. And there was inconsistency between the amounts of Title I funding between schools of the same sort. So that had to do with the rank and serving and such. So these are some common findings for allocations and reporting in CE 10. Another one was CE 19, which was the school site evaluation of program effectiveness. And so what was typically reported was that there was either an inadequate description about the evaluation, the implementation, and the impact of the Title I funded actions and services, or sometimes it was all altogether missing. So again, reflecting on what do you have in place in terms of your allocation and reporting and your school site evaluation in the school plans. And so I'm going to pause here a quick second just to give you a second to reflect, to determine, would your district get a finding based on these bulleted items? Okay, another program that had many findings was the English Learner Program. And there were three most common. These were the top high flyers here. So it was EL 10, EL 11, and 14. So EL 10 is the reclassification, and the common findings here were that reclassified students were not monitored to ensure correct classification, placement, and any additional support academically that was needed. Or there was no evidence that the LEA obtained parent opinion and consultation. So again, in your reclassification process, before, during, and after, these were common findings. In EL 11, which is teacher EL authorization, this one often we know is a teacher, it's a finding if a teacher doesn't hold the appropriate EL authorization and they are teaching EL students. EL 14 is ELD, and this one's quite interesting because there were a lot of different areas of ELD where the findings were focused on. So some of them were the EL students were not assigned to the designated ELD course as needed, or site evaluations were not directly connected to a comprehensive needs assessment to prioritize the EL students' needs for consideration of inclusion in the school plan. Also, ELD program did not address all grade levels, or the ELD program was not based on sound educational theory, or EL program was not implemented effectively with adequate resources and personnel, whether there was professional development or enough authorized EL teachers to provide the EL program. So again, where would your district stand if you were being reviewed in your EL program? All right, now let's move on to the 21-22 school year. So we know that the program instruments are important in gathering our evidence for an FPM review, but also for anyone that's not being reviewed, those program instruments are your roadmap. They're your guide to ensure that your systems, your policies and procedures are up to date with whatever the changes that come for the next upcoming year. So right now on the website, there are 20 instruments for the 21-22 FPM year. 16 out of the 20 have been released now. And the two latest instruments are the Disaster Recovery Monitoring Instrument and Fiscal Monitoring. The LEA notifications, we know that the districts and charters that are scheduled for next year's 21-22 FPM school year, they were notified this week. Actually, we heard on Monday. Most of the LEAs and charters were notified what programs, what schools were being reviewed, and the actual date of the review. And lastly, the FPM training. So Typically, we usually host one in the south here at Laco in August and one up north in the Sacramento area. But this time, because of where we are in the pandemic, CDE is going to host the virtual FPM training on August 3rd through the 6th via Zoom. And so for those of you that have been notified, it is imperative that you attend all of the sessions that pertain to your review. So it's important you get as many people from your site and district office and different departments to participate in this training. So now what? So if you're not being reviewed, this is something that everyone should be doing, and that is looking at the 21-22 FPM instruments. And so first of all, you want to ask yourself, what programs do you participate in? What changes were made in the 21-22 instruments? And how that's done simply is sometimes it's just old-fashioned side by side and just compare and see what has actually changed. Whether it's you or a clerical assistant that goes line by line and notes those changes, it's good to kind of see what's different. And then you have to reflect, once you see these changes, how do these changes affect your current policies and procedures? And do you need to confirm perhaps if everything is in place, or maybe certain changes in the instrument cause you to modify certain policies and procedures? Or maybe you recognize that there's not a policy or procedure at all, so you're going to have to create one. So again, it's good that everyone reflects and looks at all these instruments, and hopefully in the summertime, as they, 16 of them have come out, and hopefully soon the other 4. But again, get a jump on it and see what changes have taken place. So let's take a closer look at fiscal monitoring as it just came out recently. Here's a couple of changes in the fiscal monitoring instrument. So the FM1 is time and effort requirements. And so this is to look at, in the 2021 FPM instrument, what it was written for. FM1 was to ensure the local educational agency properly charges and documents salary and wages that are reasonable, necessary, and allowable in accordance with applicable program requirements. But if you take a look at the new instrument in 21-22, there's significant changes here. And so you can see the bolded area where it's saying all salary and wages charged to federal programs that are based on records that accurately reflect the work performed and are supported by a system of internal control. So if you look at the one up above, you can clearly see the first one kind of is loose or vague, or perhaps the intention is there, but it's not explicit. So now, moving forward, this is clearly saying all salaries and wages, and it has to accurately reflect the work performed, and there has to be a part of a system of internal control. So again, all of these, the evidence that's collected will clearly address these 3 components of FM1. So let's take another look at another one. So the FM2 is allowable costs. So as you can see, the first one is here. It's kind of vague. It's pretty similar to FM1. But now in FM2 allowable costs, what's been added is the LEA is required to have a system of internal control. And so again, it stands to reason that you have to have the evidence that's clearly tied to your systems of control. So if you say you have it, then you need to be implementing this system of control, and there needs to be evidence to show that it's working and that it's all under this one system of internal control. So just a quick review is a system of internal control. It's necessary because it ensures that the goals and the objectives are going to be achieved. And how this is documented, the evidence that you collect is through the policies and procedures and through the implementation of everyone following these policies and procedures. So again, questions to ask yourself. What does your system of control look like? Who's part of your system of internal control? Is it accounts payable? Is it a Fed state office? Is it procurement? Again, all of the areas that your federal programs touch. And then, does everyone know the policies and procedures? And is everyone following them? And how would you know who's monitoring it? Again, if everyone knows the policies and procedures, then you don't have, say, someone that goes straight to accounts payable and says, hey, use my Title I funds to pay for this invoice. Again, it has to go through the proper channels and following all your policies and procedures. So again, we want to make sure that you keep this on your radar as we move forward, because again, with the pandemic, perhaps certain procedures were altered as a result of you couldn't do things in person. So moving back into the next school year, what changes have you made? And if you're going to go back to your original policy and procedures, then make sure that it aligns to what's actually happening. So again, just something to think about, and to not fall off your radar. It definitely is important to start now in looking forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Jeannie.
Thanks, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm going to highlight some pieces about LCAP submission and the approval process. And before doing that, I just want to acknowledge all of the hard work that all of you have put in this time that's related to the LCAP, amongst all the changes with the new template. And I know that you have endured through this process, and really appreciate all the efforts that you've made toward working within the new requirements. So with that, let's go on to the next slide, please. And so I'm going to start today with some reminders about the final steps in the process for local board adoption of the LCAP and budget for the 21-22 school year, and submission to the county office for review and approval. So first, LEAs needed to hold a public hearing for their LCAP and their budget for the 21-22 school year. Then at a separate meeting following the public hearing and before July 1st, the governing board for the LEA needs to adopt the LCAP and the budget. And then within 15 days of local board adoption, LEAs are required to submit their LCAP to the county office for the review and approval process in conjunction with the LEA's budget to be submitted for the review and approval process. And as a reminder, both LEAs and charters will submit their adopted LCAPs to LACO through the eLCAP portal, and the link is included on the slide for your reference. And so let's take a look at the next slide, next slides at some instructions for submission of the LCAP through the eLCAP system. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for those of you who built your LCAP either yourself or using a vendor, you will upload a PDF of the entire document, including all of the required components. The screenshot displays where you will click to add a new plan. I think we're one slide ahead. Can you go back one slide? There you go. Thank you. So this screenshot displays where you will click to add a new plan. Then you will fill out the contact information being requested, including the board approval date, and upload your PDF. The PDF needs to be a single document with all of the components in the correct order as ready for web posting. You will click the Submit button after saving the uploaded plan. Next slide, please. So for the submission, if you've built your LCAP in the eLCAP system, you will use the Submit button that appears at the top of this screenshot. This will upload all together all of the items you have built in the system and the components you have uploaded, including the budget overview for parents and the annual update for the learning continuity plan. Remember, districts and charters will submit within 5 days of board adoption, and charters will also submit their plan to their authorizer. Next slide, please. We've noticed with some of the submissions that we have received that some have not included each of the required components. If you know that your submission is missing something, such as the budget overview for parents or one of the 2 annual updates, please contact us so we can reset your submission for you to resubmit the complete documents all together. This visual is a reminder of the complete LCAP, which includes the budget overview for parents, annual update addressing the 1920 LCAP, and the annual update addressing the learning continuity plan and the related instructions. And at the bottom of the slides is this slide is the new LCAP, which includes the new expenditure tables and the related instructions. All of these components on this slide are being completed this year, and they all represent a complete LCAP. Next slide, please. After selecting the Submit button in the eLCAP system, the system's going to send an email to the district superintendent requesting authorization for the submission. This email will ask the superintendent to authorize the submission. And the message will come from the local control and accountability plan, and it will indicate webmaster@laco.edu. You will need to alert your superintendent to expect this authorization email. Once we have in the system identified that the plan has been authorized, then the review and approval process can begin. Next slide, please. So we're now going to shift to the approval process that follows submission of the adopted LCAP. So once the LCAP submission is authorized, LACO's state and federal programs team and business of advisory services in conjunction will complete a review of the plan to determine, 1, if the plan adheres to the template adopted by the state board and follows the related instructions, and 2, if the budget for the applicable fiscal year adopted by the governing board includes expenditures sufficient to implement specific actions and strategies in the LCAP adopted by the governing board. And this is based on projections included in the plan. And then 3, if the LCAP adheres to the expenditure requirements that specifically address the use of funds apportioned on the basis of the number and concentration of unduplicated pupils to increase or improve services for unduplicated pupils. Next slide, please. Here we're going to look at key dates for the approval process. These key dates are provided on the slide. First, the initial phase to the LCAP review and approval process occurs between July 1 and August 15th. During this time, if the COE can determine that the submitted LCAP has met each of the 3 approval criteria, the LCAP can move forward for approval. If it cannot be determined on or before August 15th that the 3 criteria have been met, the county office will request clarification in writing from the governing board of the school district. This process for clarification begins a series of correspondence between the county office and the local governing board. And the process spans across 15-day time spans that are specifically outlined in statute. Specifically, on or before August 15th, the county superintendent may seek clarification in writing from the governing board about the contents of the LCAP. Then, within 15 days, the governing board of the school district shall respond in writing to those requests for clarification. Then, within 15 days of receiving the response from the governing board, the county superintendent will determine if the response addresses what is needed for approval, or will determine if they are going to submit recommendations in writing for amendments to the LCAP. In response to any recommendations for amendments, the governing board of a school district shall then consider the recommendation submitted by the county superintendent of schools in a public meeting within 15 days of receiving the recommendation. Because this series of 15 days is specifically outlined and requires communication from the governing board, we will work closely with LEAs to coordinate any clarification requests and amendment recommendations to align to pre-scheduled board meetings as much as possible. Additionally, it is important to note that any amendments to an LCAP must be approved by October 8th if they meet the 3 criteria for approval. The deadline for LCAP approval also connects to the budget review cycle and timeline for budget approval. So let's take a look at that connection on the next slide. The key dates and initial phases and approval process for the LCAP that we have just discussed are included on the left. And the key dates and initial phases for the district budget approval cycle are included on the right. By September 15th, county offices determine if budgets are approved, conditionally approved, or disapproved. The budget review is thorough and addresses multiple factors, including if the budget does not include expenditures necessary to implement the LCAP. During the budget review cycle, the county office provides recommendations if the budget of a school district is conditionally approved or disapproved. Then, on or before October 8th, the governing board of the school district, in conjunction with the superintendent of schools, shall review and respond to recommendations of the county superintendent of schools at a regular meeting of the governing board of the school district. And this response shall include any revisions to the adopted budget and other proposed actions to be taken, if any, that are a result of those recommendations. This slide shows the interdependence of the LCAP cycle and the budget approval cycle. The October 8th budget approval deadline coincides with the LCAP approval date. Following these deadlines, additional requirements apply if the LCAP and budget cannot be approved. Next slide, please. This next slide addresses the presentation of the local indicators to the governing board. And there have been a number of questions from districts about the timeline for reporting local indicators to the board. LEAs are required to present the local indicators to the board at the same meeting in which the LCAP and budget are adopted. Be that as it may, if an LEA did not present the indicators to the board in conjunction with the LCAP adoption, the LEA still needs to present them to the board and will be uploading them for the fall dashboard. While we have heard that there may be adjustments to accountability reported on the dashboard in the fall for local indicators, LEAs continue to be required to upload their results to the dashboard for each of the local indicators. The LCFF priorities for which local indicators apply and the CDE resources for each are included on the slide for your reference. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie, who will follow up with some end of the year reminders.
Thanks, Jeannie. Yeah, just a few things we want to remind you of as you're finishing up this year and thinking about the coming year, and a few things that, that we don't want to slip by. So let's take a look at a few of those. The first has to do with just a reminder about the consolidated application. And we will be doing a workshop on that on July 1st. But for those of you who can't attend or who are early birds and getting started, just a few reminders. The submission deadline, because of the late release, is changed to July 22nd. But we did get a clarification from CDE and that you can use a subsequent board date, because we heard from a lot of you that you don't have July board meetings. And so that was problematic. So you can use a subsequent board date. You can submit it on July 21st and then report a later date as long as it's not beyond August 31st. So a board date through August 31st. And that's in the instructions on page 87, if you have any questions about that. If you're delayed in submitting your application, then your board date has to be after the date of submission. So if it's after the 31st, then your board date would be, the application is submitted prior, the date has to be equal to or earlier than the submission date. So, but the DLAC date, the other thing to keep in mind, there's a date for DLAC review, and that needs to be on or before the board approval date. So at some point, you need to indicate when the DLAC had an opportunity to review the application. So just some date reminders on the ConApp. And I think we have some more reminders on the next page. And that had to do with equitable services consultation documentation. You'll find that in the 21-22 consolidated application data collections, there's a page that requires you to provide documentation that you provided appropriate consultation with your private schools for equitable services for the coming year. This applies to all your ESSA programs, so Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. The form requires you to answer just 3 questions. The first is, did consultation occur? And the second was consultation agreement met? And the third was, does the LEA have a signed written affirmation on file? Sometimes we get questions or districts are concerned because they're afraid that a negative response is going to trigger a problem indicating that they perhaps didn't do something right. That's not necessarily the case. You may have done everything correctly and met your obligation. You still may have to indicate no to one of these questions. So a lot of that depends on maintaining documentations and showing that you've made multiple attempts to reach out to your private schools. And secondly, if the LEA disagrees with the views of the private school officials with respect to any particular issue, remember the final determination is with the school district, but you need to provide in writing the reasons for your decisions on that. So let's take a look at some of the yes, no, and the answers on the next slide. We'll look at each of those. What does it mean? Did meaningful consultation occurs? And sometimes there are questions on this. So if the LEA made multiple attempts to reach out to the private school and documented those attempts, that's number one, that you did reach out to the schools. Consultation is considered to occur, and you can check yes if the private school responded indicating they want to participate for the, whoops, that's wrong, 21-22 school year. And they've provided you an affirmation that you consulted with them about that. So if you consulted, they agreed, that's fine, consultation occurred. It also occurred if the private school respond and say, no, we're not interested in participating. And then they need to document that they agreed to that. No, they don't want to. So consultation occurred if either of those things happen. You are not able to say consultation occurred if the private school didn't respond with a written affirmation within a reasonable amount of time. So that would be a no. However, in that case, you need to maintain documentation of your attempts to reach out. Again, that doesn't mean that the district did not meet its obligation. It just means that they were not able to consult because there was no response from the private school. So keep that documented. So the next question is, was agreement met? Okay. An agreement was met if the private school agreed to participate and they signed, again, the affirmation saying that consultation occurred. The private school may also have indicated they didn't wish to participate, as in the previous slide, and they said no and affirmed that case. Again, agreement was met. They agreed not to participate. So agreement was met doesn't just mean they're participating. It could mean they decided, no, we're not going to participate, and you both agreed on that. Agreement was considered not met if the private school didn't agree with the decisions the district made on what services will be provided. And in that case, as we mentioned earlier, the private school needs to provide in writing the reasons for their decision. So maintain documentation. The third question is, do you have a signed affirmation on file? And CDE has indicated that in addition to that affirmation, you should also include the response to their intent to participate, any notes from your consultation meeting. So as much documentation as possible. If no affirmations on file, then again, maintain evidence of all your attempts to consult with the school. All right, moving on from the ConApp. And again, if you want more in depth, we'll be doing a page-by-page review first day of July. But you neglected to put them on the school-wide page. So what you'll have to do is go back into the ConApp, and this is your winter 2021 ConApp, and add that school to the form. And then you won't have to provide the information in CalPads. The other possibility, and this I can't imagine, but CD has said it's possible if the school for some reason didn't implement a program and didn't provide the services. In that case, you need to resolve all your other errors, and then they want you to talk to CDE about that, and I'm not sure what that response would be. The most likely scenario is it got skipped on the school-wide page. So just be prepared if you get a call from your CalPads people and asking for data for your targeted schools, that is required, and it could be because you didn't check them correctly. All right, next we'll look at some year-end evaluations, just some reminders. There are things that need to happen at schools, there are district-wide program evaluations, and then some related to parent engagement. So let's take a look first at the school level evaluations. And On the next slide, school plans. For Title I school-wide schools, the School Site Council needs to evaluate both the implementation and the effectiveness in the program in improving student achievement and determine if the plan has been effective. And then step 2 is to use those results in revising the plan. So we suggest that you have that documented somewhere in their planning process, somewhere in the plan. You might reference what that evaluation, how that took place, but some sort of school level, and this is part of FPM now, they're very much looking for an evaluation in there, and they're also questioning how you're using that information. Was the plan effective, or is it just a rollover plan? You keep doing the same thing and not using the evaluation results for continuous improvement. All right. The other evaluation is a district level evaluation. This often gets missed. Districts are often not aware of this, but it is, when you look at the spring consolidated application, you will find an assurance that your district has agreed to that the results of an annual evaluation demonstrate that your LEA and each school are implementing programs, consolidated programs that are not of low effectiveness based on criteria established by the local board. So it's a federal requirement. It applies to Title I, II, III, and IV. And this means that your board should have established criteria for determining, are your programs effective? So what is that criteria? Do you have that criteria? So you want to look, see if you can find that somewhere, if it's in your board criteria listed somewhere or described. Where is that? What is it? And how are you reporting that to the board? If not, you'll need to go back and look at working with the board to develop program effectiveness criteria and having results of an evaluation to say, are the federal funds you're receiving making a difference, essentially. And the third is parent engagement. Parent engagement, federal requirement for Title I requires that if you receive Title I funds, you have to have a parent engagement policy, and you need to annually review that policy with meaningful involvement of parents, and then again use the findings to improve your parent involvement policy for the coming year. So some questions to think about is, who are the parents? How does that process? Do you have some districts have maintained advisory committees? They may have committees that reflect parents from their Title I schools. How do you make that happen? Who are the parents that are involved, and how do you do that, and how do you document it? So 3 evaluations at the end of the year that you need to just be aware of. All right, and next is we're looking at next year, and that is again Title I. And this is something, again, that often gets missed. There used to be a requirement in the consolidated application in the spring for you to rank your schools. Ever since that's been removed, only people that have been around a long time know there's a requirement. If you're new, you may not be aware of that. But annually, districts are required, or LEAs, any LEA, so it's usually a school district because you have multiple schools, required to rank your schools for Title I services. And that ranking is based on poverty data. And the poverty data you should use is last year's 2020 CalPADS free and reduced lunch, free and reduced meal data. So you'll determine which schools are eligible, and to determine that, you need to follow the ranking procedures that are listed on the CDE School Allocations page website. They provide the step-by-step process for determining which schools are eligible. So first, you determine which schools are eligible, and an eligible school doesn't mean you have to serve it. Only certain schools are required to be served, but you determine how far down that list you go, so you have enough money so schools can provide a reasonable program. Then once you've done that, you're going to determine the estimated school level Title I funding based on that ranking. And the estimates right now, you're pretty safe if you use the current year's funding amount. We don't anticipate any reduction in Title I schools funding, but we're seeing the president's proposal is an increase in Title I funding for the coming year. So But the safest estimate is to use 85% of your current year's funding, because of hold harmless, most districts would not fall below the 85% of your current year's funding unless for some reason there was a precipitous decline in your district that was unexpected. So you're going to determine the estimated school level funding based on that ranking. And Adrienne mentioned this is an FPM finding. Earlier she talked about the inconsistency in funding. There are rules about how schools are funded for Title I, so look at that web page to make sure that you're funding those schools appropriately. Next, you need to inform your schools of their Title I status, that they are eligible, and give them an estimated entitlement for planning purposes. And ensure that if you have school-wide schools, make sure they have a board-approved plan in place prior to expending funds. If your plan crosses school years, then your plan may still be in effect for the current year. But if you do an annual year end and you start with the beginning of the school year, you want to make sure you have a new plan in place. For targeted assistance schools, make sure they have multiple objective academically related criteria in place to identify your students most at risk of failure that are going to receive services, because those are the only students that they're able to serve. So check that webpage, and that's an important thing to get started right now because school's starting. One more thing, a reminder, and that's about reconciliation of time and effort reports. Right? So the Code of Federal Regulations allows for short-term fluctuations between your actual what your wages and salaries and the workload that your staff is actually carrying out. So you can have a short-term change. In other words, somebody for a short period of time, perhaps their time and effort reports don't exactly match the distribution as they should. But at the end of the year, that has to be trued up. Okay, so the actual amount that you pay for that cost of that salary matches the time and effort report. So, whoops. So, So, by the end of the year, you have to do that final adjustment. So somebody, and you might be checking someone in your business office needs to be working, and they may be working with you in the program office to say, if there were changes throughout the year, we need to now properly charge. In other words, if you had a split funded person and they were working Title I and Title III, or Title III and General Fund, whatever that split was, and for a period of time their time and effort report was off, their percentages didn't match what they're being paid, then for a short period of time those budgets can float that way, but at the end of the year it's got to reconcile so your actual amount that is reported is exactly what is included in the time and effort reports. So that should be taking place in your business office, but you need to check with your business office and make sure that is going on if there were any changes this year. All right. Oh, yes. All right. All right, Noreen, I'll try speaking up. Okay, but too late, because it's almost the end. All right, we will have, this is the end of today's meeting, but we will have another meeting. Next meeting will be in August. You get July to breathe. Okay, whoops, we lost our PowerPoint again. Keeps disappearing.
It's coming back.
So our next meeting will be in August, same time, and we'll be sending something out. We also listed some tentative dates on the PowerPoint slide. So we will be sending a list of the dates for the year out to you. And generally we're looking at, it's toward the last Thursday, same as we've had this year. And we're looking at the beginning of the year, continuing our meetings virtually, but we will be sending something out to get your input. We miss seeing you in person, but on the other hand, we were able to talk to so many more of you. You're not driving in LA traffic or driving a long distance to get here, and we've heard from a number of you that's very helpful. So we want to look at how we can take the best of what's gone on virtually and also move forward and do a better job next year. So we'll be connecting with you on that. Before we go, we did want to just, and I don't think they're here today because they've already taken off on that airplane, but we're losing a few people this year through retirements. Lourdes Hale from Inglewood, Becky Summers from Glendora. Many of you know these folks. Martha Rojas, been around here for a long time, from South Whittier. All three of those are retiring. So if they're your go-to person for questions or you're expecting to see them at a meeting, they have decided to retire. So best wishes to all of them. And I'm not sure, let us know in the chat if there's anyone else who's sneaking away on us that we don't know about. But we do want to end on the next slide. Yeah, we just want to thank all of you from the kids who benefit most from what you do. Because you are where you are, you don't get those immediate rewards of that smile when you take a little extra time and listen, that aha moment when someone finally gets it and they're reading or they've mastered something. But you're the people who make it happen, and you're the people in the middle who have the worst place. You get hit from all sides. And I really want you to know how much we appreciate how much you do for them. And it does make a difference. So, keep a picture of your favorite child on your wall and don't forget that. But this year, you guys have earned gold stars. You've done so much to keep things going for students who are needing it most this year and hurting the most this year. So thank you so much. I know you don't get enough of those. You get a lot of the other stuff, but you don't get enough thank yous. Okay. All right. So let's see. All right. Lots of thank yous in the chat. Let me just see if there's any quickies, since are we a little early? A little bit early. Yes, the addendum, there's a question about the ConApp. The ConApp, that is such a weird page. That page it says federal addendum. It's actually your LCAP approval date, your original LCAP. So yes, 2017. If you read the instructions, you'll see it says put the date that you put last year. So because it's a 3-year LCAP. So it's not really your federal addendum, it's your LCAP approval from 2017. So Rami, you are correct, as usual. Okay. Yes, virtual summer training. I'm checking our team to see their pulse right now and how LCAPs go. But yes, we will be looking at something during the summer. Yes. Okay, I think those were. Is there an estimated date? Now, usually it's August when the Title I entitlements come out. So usually they get an estimated amount out. Leslie Sharp up at CDE is pretty good about that. So I would expect to see that. I'd keep watching the CDE website sometime in August. If whoever sees it first, send me an email and we'll send it to everybody to let you know when estimated entitlements. Usually Title I is one of the first to get up there. So check in August. Okay. Charter schools, Title I school ranking generally doesn't apply to charter schools because you only have one school, and if you're a single school or single school district or only have, then it doesn't apply to you, so no. Okay, and I think we may get out of doing a Q&A this month if we can catch everything. All right, I think we did it. Yes. Congratulations to all of you. All right, so we will be in touch with you. We will get out dates for the summer, and we will look into some summer opportunities and what we can provide either back to our new directors or the modules like last year. All right. Have a summer. I like to say have a wonderful. Just have a summer, okay? Even if it's short. All right. Take care of yourselves. We need you. Have a good summer. Bye-bye.